morning. I wanted to come along because welfare reform is a very, very controversial issue, and it's going to affect a lot of people in many ways because, you know, you see all these opinion polls which basically say that people on benefit are scoundrels, and then I think to myself, well, you know, that's not true. There's some people who abuse the system, and they need to be clamped down on. But we need to know about the benefit system, that it's there to help people to get on in life when they run into difficult times. It's there to help people bring up families. That's why we have child benefit, and you know, there's millions of people who get child benefit. But the way that the government's gone about doing it is that obviously we've got this deficit to pay off with the financial crisis that we've had, which is continuing to this day, which was obviously international. And although the government, the Conservatives, would try and portray that, you know, it was the public expenditure of the previous government that caused the problem with the banks, where in actual fact, you can't blame us investing in police and nurses. We can say that that caused the collapse of the banks in America, which is where it originally started. And I think the government is using the cutting the deficit approach and the debt that we owe as camouflage for really cutting into the public sector and into the welfare budget. Well, we all know it needs to be reformed. Some of the reforms they're bringing in on the universal credit, we basically agree with that. But there's a lot of other benefits that they're hidden that we think is going to cause a real problems for local communities and for people, especially in social housing. And just to let you know that the County Council will administer some of these benefits, but if you take the households in County Durham, 120,000 households are going to be affected by the cuts in welfare reform. So half the households in County Durham will be affected. And it's going to take over £150 million out of the local economy. And one of the ways that we get out of the recession is to grow the economy, which means we need people to spend money. So if the money's not there to spend, you can see what impact that will have on the economy. They have also, I think what we need to take into consideration is that the government's focusing on cutting benefits, but the other side of the equation, as far as housing benefit is concerned, is what I call bricks and mortar. What I basically believe is one of the solutions to the problems that we have is to build more houses, where the benefits, the reason why, for example, for private landlords, for example, they're driving up rents. There's a market within the private rented sector, which is increasing all the time, which means that housing benefit needs to go up to compensate for that. So it's actually what is happening in the private sector, rented sector, which is causing a lot of problems with housing benefit. And I think something like £28 billion is spent on housing benefit at the moment. And if what the government's thinking of doing next is cutting it for everybody under the age of 25, and that what they're trying to do is to force children, young people, to stay at home. Well, it's fine if you want to do that, but if you've got a lot of young people who may have gone to university, who've done the right thing, stuck in school, got the degree, found a job, they're renting somewhere, or if they're very, very lucky, they can afford a deposit on a house to buy it themselves. But normally what they would do, they would privately rent, because the social housing stock isn't what it used to be either. And let's say that young person who's done everything right, at the age of 23, finds themselves out of work. How do they pay the rent? Because the housing benefit is going to be withdrawn from them. So I think that's true, really. And there's other aspects of the welfare reform bill, with the Act now, because it's been introduced, is over occupancy. What's going to happen from, I think it's next year, is that if you live in a 2-bedroom property, but there's only you living there, and you're on housing benefit, they're going to reduce your housing benefit on average about 14-15% of the same various rates of this, because they're saying that you're under-occupying the house, even though you might have lived in that house for many, many years. They're going to reduce your benefit because you've got 2 bedrooms and there's only 1 person living there. The other things that they're doing with DLA, the way they're approaching that as well, is going to hit a lot of people. The way that the addressing changes to the housing benefit budget, which I think is the main part here, I think is going to affect tens of thousands of people. And it's coming back to the county council or the local authority. And the local authority is being told to find £170 odd million over the next 4 years. So a lot of the things that people have been taking for granted, like getting to work on the bus, is being withdrawn because the subsidy from the buses is being withdrawn. I've got constituents now who are having difficulty getting to work because the bus is being withdrawn. And my worry was that if you can't get to work and they pack the job in, if you do that, if you resign from your job, you lose your benefit for 6 months. But it wouldn't be their fault because, you know, the bus isn't there to get to work. What would happen? So I got in touch with Job Centre Plus, and what they've said is they've got a fund and they're starting to think about buying people bicycles in these situations so they can get to work.
What good's that if it's a bad winter?
Well, exactly. Well, exactly. But it just shows how stupid position we're in. I've just been to a business meeting with local companies as well, who understand these predicaments. And it's because the cuts are going too far and they're going too deep. And what you're saving on one aspect, you're actually going to have to spend on the other. And the government's having to borrow £9 billion extra to pay for the more people that we have out of work. Instead of borrowing to invest in growth and in the economy to help to create jobs. And this is what this kind of government has always done in the past. And the people who suffer the most are the people like yourselves in social housing, people who might be on benefit, people who might be on low incomes. And what people think, without looking at it, is that people on housing benefit, people just think, well, you're out of work, you haven't got a job. But 7 out of 8 people, claimants now, for housing benefit are actually in work. And the problem they've got is that they're on low incomes and they can't afford the rents. And especially in the private sector, what's happening is, especially in London, where you can pay £1,300 a month for a 1-bedroom flat, and they've capped how much benefits you can get. What's happening is, it's driving up the cost of housing benefit. It's not the claimant's fault, it's the rent they're having to pay, and it's the private landlords who are actually sort of feeding off each other and driving up the rent, because the market allows that to happen. So the housing benefit budget is going through the roof, and we do need to control it. And in my view, the way that you control it is by building more houses and by regulating and having a really close look at the private rented sector, because by 2020, in just 8 years' time, 7.5 years' time, over 20% of the housing stock in this country is going to be private rents, and I don't think it's been that high since the 1930s. And the regulation in that sector is very poor. I really sort of get annoyed about this. My post bag is always full of complaints from people who live, in areas where there's a lot of private landlords. I've got over, in some streets, in places like Furryhill and Trindon, there's a lot of old colliery houses. I've got over 50% of the housing stock in those streets that are private lets. And maybe 10 or 15% of those actually don't even live in the area, don't even live in the country. And these people who live all over the world, believe it or not, who actually own property in this constituency and in County Durham, who just see it as an asset. And what they're doing is, they can be living off at the taxpayer's expense, because a lot of the people living in the private rents are on housing benefit. So we're actually subsidising, not the claimant, not the tenant on a lot of occasions, but we're actually subsidising the private rented sector. And I think this government's focusing on the wrong people. They're trying to stigmatise people on benefit. Well, like I said, if people are, sort of like abusing the system, they've got to be dealt with. but there's more to this than meets the eye. And the government's making a really sort of party political issue out of this to say that people who are claiming benefits are all the same. The scroungers, the lazy, feckless and all this kind of stuff. It's what the Tories have always done over the years. But in actual fact, the big, in my view, and the colleagues from Durham County Council might be able to add to this or correct me if I'm wrong, is that for part of the housing benefit problem is the private rented sector. And they are not focusing on that, especially when 1 in 5 houses in this town by 2020 could be private rents. So I think we need to look at the housing sector in its entirety. We need more social housing. We need to regulate the private rented sector. There will always be a need for the private rented sector. These good landlords and these bad landlords, but the vast majority of them are amateur landlords who might have one property, they've moved on, and they say, well, we won't sell it, what we'll do is we'll rent it out. And they might think we're keeping that as our nest egg for our pension pot. And they don't realise that they've got an actual responsibility to the local community as much as to the tenant as well. And I think we need, because I've been trying to get legislation through Parliament, we need to regulate this whole area where, for example, if an area gets to a certain level of private landlords, then I think it's incumbent upon them to help upkeep that local community and that street and the park and what have you, because they actually make money out of the local community and out of the taxpayer. So there's a big kind of policy issue here that we need to get to grasps with. And the other issues around this is, yes, that we've got to drive down the benefit bill. And they want to be making savings of £18 billion over this Parliament. But George Osborne said, I think last year in the budget, that he wants to save another £10 billion. And this is why these ideas of stopping benefit for people, housing benefit people under the age of 25, be thinking of ideas, if you've got a big family, that if you've had more than 2 children, you only get child benefit for 2 children. If you have 3, well, tough luck. And so all these whole ideas, I think, are just trying to drive a wedge, and they're very divisive in our local communities, and to try and separate people out and divide people against people in the local communities as well. And one of the councils in London, Westminster, which is the Tory council, one of their councillors is quoted as saying that social housing is a privilege and not a right. In my view, everybody has a right to a home. And what the Conservatives are now saying is that it's a privilege. So what they want to do is basically make sure that social housing, because I grew up in a council house. Great, I live in Trimdon, I still live in Trimdon, I live on the same estate I grew up on. And the community spirit there, you know, was really good, you know, and still is strong in so many ways. So, and I don't like being sort of stigmatised from being that kind of background, and that's what they're trying to do. And what they want to do is run down the social housing stock, not invest in it. So people either have to buy their own homes, if indeed you can afford a deposit of say £20,000 because of the house prices. And how many I don't know how many young kids you know who are, you know, want to get married or just move on or be independent from living with the parents, can afford a deposit of £20,000 plus. It's not many. When I first got my first house back in the 80s, the deposit was £2,000. So, you know, it took us 2 years to save that up, so God knows how long it's going to take you to save £20,000 or £30,000. So these are the big issues that we're having to battle with down there. And, you know, I get a lot of people coming through the door with welfare problems and benefit problems and housing problems, and we do what we can to help on this, but we can't solve all of the problems, and sometimes the system hasn't worked properly, and sometimes we can get some of the benefit back.